In the heart of the old city, nestled between cobblestone streets and weathered buildings, there was a bookstore like no other. It was the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were meant to, hidden away from the busy squares and crowded cafes. Its entrance was marked by a modest wooden sign that read simply, Aldric's Antiquities, its letters faded by time. But if you looked closely, you would notice that this place was more than just an old bookshop. No one knew exactly how long Aldrics had been there, but rumors floated through the city. Some said it had been around for centuries, while others claimed it appeared only for certain people at certain times. Most who passed by never noticed it at all. For Leah, however, it was impossible to miss. It had been a rainy afternoon, the kind where the city streets shimmered with a thin layer of water, reflecting the gray sky. Leah had just left her job at the museum, where she worked cataloging ancient artifacts, a position she loved because it allowed her to immerse herself in the stories of the past. But this day had been particularly exhausting, her mind fogged by a seemingly endless stream of paperwork. She wasn't sure why, but instead of heading directly home, she found herself wandering through the older parts of town, drawn to the quiet alleyways and the smell of damp stone. The rain had a way of calming her, giving her a brief respite from the buzzing of her thoughts. As she walked, her eyes fell on a small, ivy-covered building tucked between two larger, grander structures. It was strange that she hadn't noticed it before. She had walked this street dozens of times. The bookstore's windows were dimly lit, flickering with the soft glow of lanterns inside. Without even thinking, Leah found herself walking toward it. She opened the door, and a small bell chimed softly overhead. Inside, the bookstore was cozy and warm, with dark wooden shelves towering over her, each one filled with books of every kind. The smell of aged paper and leather-bound tomes filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. It felt like stepping into another world, a world where time slowed down and nothing existed beyond the walls of the shop. Leah wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing the spines of books that seemed impossibly old, their titles written in languages she couldn't read. The shop was quiet, save for the faint crackle of a fire somewhere in the back. It was like no other bookstore she had ever been in. She paused in front of a tall shelf filled with leather-bound volumes. One book in particular caught her eye. It was small and unassuming, its cover worn and faded, but something about it drew her in. She reached out and carefully pulled it from the shelf. The title, written in delicate gold letters, read, Chronicles of the Lost Worlds. Intrigued, Leah opened the book. The pages were old, yellowed with age, but as she flipped through them, she realized they weren't filled with words. Instead, there were illustrations, detailed, intricate drawings of places she had never seen before. Vast landscapes, towering mountains, and deep forests, each one more vivid than the last. Her heart raced as she turned to a page near the middle of the book. There, beneath the drawing of a grand city built atop a cliff, was a single sentence written in the same gold lettering as the cover. Step inside, and you shall know. Leah blinked, her pulse quickening. The words seemed to shimmer, almost inviting her. She glanced around the shop, half expecting someone to appear and explain what was happening, but the shop remained empty. Against her better judgment, Leah whispered, "Step inside." The room around her shifted. At first, it was subtle. The light dimmed, the shadows lengthened, but then everything began to blur. The bookshelves, the wooden floor, even the air itself seemed to dissolve. Panic bubbled up inside Leah, but before she could react, she was pulled forward, her body moving as if through water. When her vision cleared, Leah was no longer in the bookstore. She stood at the edge of a vast, sprawling city, perched high on a cliff overlooking a shimmering ocean. The sky above was a deep, twilight blue, with stars just beginning to twinkle in the distance. She blinked in disbelief. This was the city from the book. The wind whipped around her, carrying with it the scent of salt water and flowers. Below, waves crashed against the rocks, and in the distance, the city gleamed with golden light. Tall towers rose from the heart of the city, connected by bridges that arched gracefully through the air. The streets were lined with trees, their leaves shimmering in the fading sunlight. Leah's heart raced. This couldn't be real. She was still in the bookstore. She had to be. But everything felt so vivid, so alive. Before she could process what was happening, a figure appeared in the distance, walking toward her. As the figure grew closer, Leah realized it was a woman, dressed in robes of deep blue and silver. Her hair, a cascade of dark curls, was woven with tiny lights that looked like stars. The woman smiled warmly as she approached. "You've arrived," she said softly, her voice like the gentle lapping of waves. "Welcome to Valoria." Leah stared at her, unable to find her voice. "Valoria?" The woman nodded. "The city of lost worlds. A place where time, space, and reality intertwine. Few are chosen to see it, but you've been called." Leah shook her head. "I don't understand. I was in a bookstore, and now I'm here? How is this possible?" The woman's smile didn't falter. "The book is a doorway, a gateway between worlds. It brought you here because you were meant to be here. Valoria holds the answers you seek." Leah felt a chill run down her spine. "Answers? I didn't know I was looking for any." The woman's gaze softened. "Everyone who finds their way to Aldric's is searching for something, even if they don't realize it. You are no different." Leah swallowed, her mind racing. None of this made sense. And yet, standing here, in this impossible city, she felt a strange pull, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The woman gestured toward the city. "You must find what you seek. Valoria will show you the way." With that, the woman turned and began to walk toward the city, her steps light and graceful. Leah hesitated for only a moment before following her. As they entered the city, Leah couldn't help but marvel at its beauty. The buildings were made of smooth, pale stone, their surfaces shimmering in the twilight. People moved through the streets, dressed in clothes that seemed both ancient and futuristic at once. There was a serenity to the place, as if time itself had slowed down. "Who are you?" Leah asked, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. The woman glanced back at her, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "My name is Amara. I am one of the guardians of Valoria." "Guardians?" Amara nodded. "Valoria is a city of knowledge and power. It exists between worlds, a place where lost things come to rest. We guard its secrets and ensure that those who find it are worthy." Leah felt a shiver of both excitement and fear. "And am I worthy?" Amara smiled again. "That remains to be seen." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the empty streets. As they passed a grand archway, Leah noticed something strange. The buildings around them began to change. The once beautiful structures twisted and warped, their smooth surfaces cracking and crumbling. The sky above darkened, the stars winking out one by one. Leah stopped in her tracks. "What's happening?" Amara's expression grew serious. "Valoria is not without its dangers. The city reflects the mind of those who enter it. It can show you your greatest desires, but it can also reveal your deepest fears." Leah's heart pounded. "My fears?" Amara nodded. "You must face them if you wish to leave this place." Panic surged through Leah. The city around her continued to decay, the once beautiful streets now dark and foreboding. Shadows crept along the edges of her vision, and she felt a cold, suffocating weight settle over her chest. "What do I do?" Leah whispered, her voice barely audible. Amara turned to her, her eyes filled with compassion. "You must confront what lies within. Only then can you find what you seek." Leah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She hadn't come here looking for anything, or at least she hadn't thought she was. But now, standing in the crumbling ruins of a city that had once been beautiful, she realized there was something she had been avoiding, something she had been running from. Her hands trembled as she clutched the book tighter, the weight of its presence grounding her. What was it that she feared? What had brought her here? As the shadows grew closer, Leah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She let the fear wash over her, let it consume her. And in that moment, she understood. She had been afraid of being lost, of not knowing her purpose. She had spent so much time wandering, searching for meaning in her work, in her life, but never quite finding it. She had been running from the uncertainty, from the possibility that she might never truly belong. But here, in Valoria, the city of lost worlds, she realized that being lost wasn't the end. It was part of the journey. Leah opened her eyes. The city had returned to its former beauty, the shadows gone, the buildings restored. The sky above shimmered with stars, and the air was filled with the soft sound of the ocean. Amara smiled. "You have found your way." Leah nodded, a sense of peace washing over her. "Thank you." Amara stepped forward, placing a hand on Leah's shoulder. "You are ready now. Valoria will always be here when you need it, but your journey lies beyond this place." With that, Amara began to fade, her figure dissolving into the air like mist. The city around Leah blurred once more, and before she knew it, she was back in the bookstore, the book still open in her hands. The shop was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire. Leah glanced around, half expecting to see Amara or the city, but everything was as it had been. She looked down at the book. The page she had been reading was now blank, the illustrations and words gone. But in their place was a new sentence, written in the same delicate gold lettering. "The journey begins when you find your way." Leah closed the book, a smile tugging at her lips. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She placed the book back on the shelf and turned toward the door. The rain had stopped, and as she stepped outside, the world seemed a little brighter, a little more alive. And as she walked down the quiet street, she couldn't help but wonder if, one day, she might find her way back to Valoria.